The villainy of the bored IT crew. Many years ago, I used to work for the national head office of a retail chain. I worked in IT. The building was ancient, Victorian era, and not amazingly well maintained. It was 8 floors of gritty stone, many nooks and crannies, and a bolted-on air conditioning system through which we used to run cables for networking. Because electricity was not really a thing when the building was first made, it had a light well in the middle. This was a 40-foot gap, open to the sky, around which the building formed a square. Windows looked out into it. There was a colony of pigeons living in the well. The bottom of the well is a solid foot-thick layer of pigeon poo and cockroaches. The IT department took up the whole of the ground floor, and one internal door opened up into this horrible mess. My department was full of idiots. It was 1988. Part 1. The crew. There was me. The trainee. I was fresh out of school, and this was my first proper job. I just did what folk told me. Every week they'd give me money. I would endeavor, usually successfully, not to screw up the payroll. That was the extent of it. There was the surfer dude. We'll call him Mike. He was pretty laid back, but every now and again you'd walk into the tea room on a night shift, and he would be off his trolley on cheap beer, and you'd have to run the shift by yourself. He would pass the time at night by nipping up to the top floor to steal ice cream from the executive freezer. There was Murrance, the shift leader. I once made a stupid joke that if Terry was short for Terrence, then Murray was short for Murrance. He just nodded and said yes, that his name was Murrance. So, we called him Murrance instead of Murray. He liked to microwave cockroaches in the tea room to prove that they would survive an apocalypse. Then there was Nobby. It's not his real name, because I can't remember his real name, but he felt like a Nobby. He had all the components to make a human being, but they were all off by small amounts. He didn't actually work in the department. He was the maintenance guy. But he lived in the building, and was always hanging out with the IT guys on the night shift. He liked to think he was a practical joker, but really he just broke stuff for a laugh and pissed people off. Part 2. The act. A usual night shift involved making sure the company mainframe was running the appropriate programs, that tapes were changed when the machine requested, that paper reports were printed and delivered to the various departments, and that any hardware issues logged during the day were addressed. I was coordinating all of that in the machine room. It wasn't quite midnight. The building was otherwise usually deserted on the night shift. From my spot by the mainframe console, I could see that Murrance and Mike were sitting in the adjoining tea room with a cheap plastic boombox cranked up, the door to the light well open, and were shooting cockroaches with a BB gun. Nobby had decided to be useful, and had taken a screwdriver upstairs to swap over a couple of the big steel monitors we used to have on the 6th floor. Murrance had decided to throw the BB gun at a cockroach when he ran out of BBs. As it was Mike's BB gun, he wasn't happy, and gingerly stepped out onto the pigeon poo to retrieve it. As he reached the middle of the light well, which was about 40 feet square, under the full moon, Nobby, who it turned out wasn't being useful, leaned out of the 6th floor window with a balloon filled with water. With a cry of Geronimo for some obscure reason, he released the balloon, and it slammed into the pigeon poo like the meteor that killed the dinosaurs. There was a brown explosive splatter of cockroach and decades-old fecal matter. Mike was covered from head to toe in noisome filth. He screamed like a 60s schoolgirl at a Beatles concert as the surviving roaches took flight and surrounded him like a fuzzy brown halo. He ran back to the door, screeching and waving his arms like a madman. Murrance casually kicked the door closed and told him to wipe off before stepping back into the tea room. The scratching and scrabbling on the door was not too dissimilar to that moment in a bad zombie movie when they'd figured out where you were, but hadn't quite got the hang of the concept of door handle yet. Murrance laughed. Mike screamed. I rolled my eyes, entered the command to start the payroll and changed the tape. Part 3. The consequence. Murrance eventually relented, and let a stinking shell-shocked Mike back into the tea room. He immediately grabbed all of the paper towels, and began to shed poo and bugs all over the room, all the while sobbing. His usual surfer cool completely lost with the discovery that cockroaches can fly. It is at this point that Nobby returns. Initially, I noted he had a big grin on his face, but upon hearing Mike's angry distress, quickly decides that fessing up isn't in his best interest, and comes up with,
"What the hell happened to you?"
Now, I was not aware at the time that immediately prior to Nobby's great gag, someone had leaned out of an upstairs window into the light well and had yelled at Mike and Murrance to cut it out. It wasn't Nobby, but some poor cleaner working late, who was undoubtedly sick of the loud music and the happy cries of "I got one" drifting up the light well. This is unfortunate, because Nobby's quick thinking firmly cemented into Mike's head that it was the cleaner who had dropped the water balloon. Now naked apart from underpants and his socks, he grabbed his filth-soaked shorts and ran from the tea room into the nearby stairwell. We all thought he was going to take a shower. What he was actually doing was hunting cleaners. To this day, I will occasionally imagine the shock on the cleaner's face as a skinny mullet-wearing surfer dude, almost completely naked, leapt from the stairwell and attacked the guy wearing the backpack vacuum cleaner. I cringe when I remember the description of Mike rubbing his filthy shorts in the guy's face, and the bruises Mike received as the result of being roundly beaten with the business end of a backvac 2000. Nobody came out of this looking good, but the only person I feel sorry for was the totally innocent cleaning guy who was just trying to get on with his job. Part 4. The outcomes. Frankly, it's probably lucky the police didn't get involved. The daylight brought the managers and staff filtering back into the building. The cleaners had all walked out when Mike went Burko. Nobby hadn't fixed the broken computers. Murrance had gone home early, and as a result, I had totally screwed the pooch on the payroll run. When we eventually arrived back in the office the following afternoon, there had been ructions. Mike had been escorted from the building. Not because of the assault, but because a couple of nights previously, someone had installed CCTV in the executive kitchen, and he was seen leaving the floor with an arm full of stolen ice creams. Murrance had been censured for leaving early, and was on a final written warning. He was later fired after rigging a booby trap for a programmer involving an industrial leaf blower full of foam packing chips. Nobby. Well, he was a relative of the guy who owned the building, so was pretty much untouchable. He did once get chased for stealing tools from a builder. Got kicked in the nethers for telling one of the receptionists that her eyes were at different heights, and accidentally locked himself in the service lift over the weekend not once, but 3 times, in my years working for the company. After the building shut down some years later, he later got a job working at a hospital, and was fired from there after walking into the machine room after his lunch break with a plastic bag full of butcher's bones and saying, in front of horrified management staff,
"Look what the guy from pathology gave me for the dog."
For my faults. I got tasked with crawling through the air conditioning ducts with network cables for the whole of the next week. A thankless, filthy job, but it was the year that Die Hard came out, so I could pretend. I stayed working for the company for another 8 years, and regret almost every moment of it. And the cleaner? I wish I knew.